So now it's Galactus? Sure, why not? So if you spend any time whatsoever on Twitter, Reddit, Discord, the various Marvel Snap Discords, whether it's the official one or your favorite content creators, you've probably seen people complain since its release, especially now the Shuri's been nerfed, about Galactus. Galactus is a deck that is incredibly pulverizing to the game in the way that it plays because it goes against every single idea that Snap has fundamentally set forth since the very beginning. You have 3 lanes, you try to contest 2 out of 3 of them to make sure you win the game by having the most power on your side. When Galactus comes in, it gets rid of the other 2 and then completely changes the game fundamentally. That is a big issue when it comes to the play patterns that people have. However, it's not going to be the biggest issue in the world, and I think that it's being misconstrued a little bit based on people's perception of not Galactus, but rather the way Marvel Snap works and functions all on its own. In order to understand why people have this hate of Galactus and have since the very beginning, even going back to his nerf, which in all honesty was a buff for the Galactus deck, we need to understand the way that Marvel Snap works and the economy of Marvel Snap. The biggest problem that Marvel Snap has is really 2 things, and I've covered both of them in the past, but not really as in-depth as we are today. The first one I'm going to skim over a bit quicker than we normally would just because I had a longer video about this topic. Marvel Snap really only functions in one playing field, best of 1, singleton format, and that's just the way the ladder works, and that's it. There's no unranked mode, and I really don't count battle mode as an actual unranked version of the game because that requires some friends to play with. Yeah, you can throw your code into various Discord servers, whatever, but that doesn't really make for an unranked mode. When you look at the way that Marvel Snap is played in the singleton ladder, it's very swingy. The idea that you have all these counters to Galactus, which are readily available to pretty much most players, being pull 1, 2, and 3 cards for the most part, it's easy to say, well, Galactus is pretty easily stopped. Why are we complaining about it? The problem is the game in itself is swingy. Galactus is a problem because it represents a thing of, I have a bomb, I'm going to play it, do you have the counter? And if you don't have the counter, it's easy to be like, okay, yeah, retreat, lose the 1 or 2 cubes, and that's it. The problem is, because this is the way the ranked mode works, and it's a ladder structure of needing to constantly gain cubes to climb up the ladder, and albeit at a pretty reasonably slow pace, it creates this mental idea of feeling extra bad for the player that's losing to Galactus. In order to make sure that players are able to actually compete against the deck, a lot of players typically don't want to slot in counters to Galactus in their main deck. Looking at cards like Debris, Cosmo, maybe Polaris to move something over if they're actually playing a 1 or 2 drop early on. Something like Wolverine is typically seen. And then of course you can play Arrow or anything that just disrupts the way Galactus works, or having to make sure that it either fills the side that Galactus is played or move him over to a lane that's already filled. These are all cards that really do well against Galactus, but the problem is most people don't want to just slot in cards for the certain matchup because they want to be able to play with the deck that they're enjoying. They don't want to slot in Debris into a deck that really has no use for Debris, or a card like Arrow, where it kind of makes their turn 4 or 5 plays in games where they don't go against Galactus feel a bit worse. Of course, the easiest way to solve this is a couple of things. 1, introduce a best of 3 mode, or implement sideboards into the conquest mode. Either way, sideboards are a must. You can still have best of 1 ranked, the singleton format as we already all know, but of course, giving players the tools to have sideboard cards and tech cards to hate out Galactus and other decks as well, you don't have to worry about forcing players to play these cards main deck. And I'll be honest, this would make Galactus really bad in best of 3 modes. So by giving the players the tools to combat this deck in this way, it'll make complaints go down significantly. On top of which, Marvel Snap, outside of just the best of 3 ranked issue, needs some unranked modes to allow players to take a break from the grind. And I don't mean just a random unranked game that functions the exact same as Marvel Snap does already. I'm talking about things that are a bit more nuanced or interesting. Of course, you have things like Limited, So you can have draft. We already have the website that players can use to go ahead and draft decks, and then they can copy and paste them into their game and then play their friends in that way, which is really fun. But it would be better to have an official way to play this on Marvel Snap natively rather than having to go use a third-party client. So having draft, having sealed, things like that, and even maybe cube would be interesting, though I think the card pool is a little small. Though a cube mode for things like Series 1 only, Series 2 only, Series 3 only, etc., would be interesting. Now, of course, the caveat to this is every card would have to be playable, and it doesn't matter what your collection level is. Going into these modes, because they're unranked and for fun modes, would allow players to try out potentially different cards and different decks that they don't normally get to try out, and that also gives them an idea of if they want to buy them later for their personal collection. Speaking of personal collection, the biggest issue that Marvel Snap has currently is the fact that Second Dinner really loves this philosophy of unique collections and making sure that everyone's collections feel special to them. No one's going to have the same exact collection. That's supposed to be the beauty of Marvel Snap. The problem is this is kind of a fairy tale approach. On paper, this sounds nice, I guess, but in practice, this does not work in any way, shape, or form. The problem is players will always want to play these type of games competitively, especially when you've already established that there are ranks. It's going to make people want to do the best that they can and play with the best cards that they can. The card acquisition does not reflect that. And as long as they're basing their card acquisition process on this philosophy that they need to have unique collections for every player, the game will not thrive as it could. Of course, I know they want to do this mobile game approach of really wonky monetization and all these issues like that have been addressed several times before. I don't need to get into that too much. But if you look at third-party organizers, for example, whether it's content creators or different companies that typically promote competitive play or tournaments, we've already seen a plethora of these type of things released to the public to have this amazing spectator sport that could be Marvel Snap. As long as the card acquisition works as the way it does, Marvel Snap's not going to be able to capitalize on this, at least from Second Dinner's perspective. You're probably going to be able to do this with pro players, from content creators like we've seen Kawa do and things like that. But Second Dinner is inevitably going to want to get in on it for themselves because why not? The spectator sport of any esport is always going to be nice because it brings in sponsorship opportunities, just more eyes on the game that you've been creating, and more eyes typically means more players. Every game that has a competitive slant to it wants to have some type of, I use this lightly, but esport, but at least, pro level play. Every other TCG has pro level play already. You look at Magic the Gathering, you look at Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, even Legends of Runeterra. So if Second Dinner wants to take full advantage of this opportunity that would be in front of them for more money, more eyes, and more players, which of course goes back to more money again, they're going to need to change their card philosophy completely. This idea that you can have a unique collection from your opponent is not going to work. Because in order for players to do the best that they can and play the best that they can, they're going to want to acquire the best cards possible. The two issues that really combat this problem for players is the fact that card acquisition is incredibly slow because A, cards are released on a weekly basis, one at a time, which makes for stagnated metas, cards that have little to no impact on the meta themselves, because ultimately these cards end up being things like Jeff, Stegoron, or even Snowguard, looking at this month especially. A lot of these cards don't have the biggest impact, and even with all of them together, looking at this bunch for this month, Snowguard, Jeff, Stegoron, and then Hitmonkey really didn't change the meta all too much. Hitmonkey made the biggest impact, but otherwise, you still see all the same decks that we've seen both prior and after the Shuri nerf. Where in contrast, if we look at the very beginning of the first massive drop for all of the new cards being Shuri, Galactus, Thanos, pretty much your big bads in general, and then all these other cards being both introduced in Series 5 and 4 at the same time. This was a massive shakeup to the meta. Even with the slow card acquisition, people were able to pick and choose what they wanted because, of course, Second Dinner did gift 3,000 and some of them 6,000 tokens to get a card that you wanted. And a lot of players were able to pretty much jump off and go get a card that can create a deck all on its own. This shook up the meta. Since then, We haven't had that really happen with a new card outside of Season Pass cards. So moving forward, Second Editor is going to need to change their philosophy altogether. The token shop needs to be revamped completely. Token acquisition and the way that they're monetized and the amount that goes towards what you're getting for cards needs to be changed completely. The overall price of the game needs to be changed completely. All they need to do is make cards more affordable and monetize cosmetics like every other game that does this competitively. It makes you money. If you look at Magic Arena, for example, every few months or so, they always have these anthologies come out. Typically, you look at these anthologies and they have 10 to 12 cards dropped immediately. You can either do two things. If you want to get single cards, you can use your wild cards as normal, craft cards, and get, one mythic for one card, and et cetera, et cetera. But if you really wanted to get all 10, 12 cards, you pay $20, sometimes $30, and you just get 4 copies of each card. That's awesome. It still makes Wizards money. They're still able to actually monetize their game, but it makes for a much cheaper experience for players to get the cards they want, and it offers a path for free-to-play players to still acquire the cards that they want out of the anthology if they don't want to spend money on all of them at once. It's a win-win. And on top of that, cosmetics are heavily monetized, as they should be. That's what should make you the money. Any competitive game, Call of Duty, Rainbow Six Siege, Smite, League of Legends, Dota, all these games that have a competitive scene have fairly easy acquisition of champions, things you can play as, or any way to actually just play the game itself, whereas the cosmetics are what's locked behind paywalls, as it should be. And until Second Dinner makes this change, we're going to see more complaints about things like Galactus, because when it comes down to it, part of it is the fact that it is a FOMO aspect. People go against Galactus when they might not have him themselves. And that creates an issue for players because, let's face it, Marvel Snap is a fairly expensive game if you want to actually build a collection or max out your collection. And on top of which, a lot of these cards are competitively slanted that are in Series 4 and 5 that cost more money to get, and that can create some feels bad for players that don't want to spend money in the game. And the grind to just get a Series 5 card for a token aspect is forever. It takes about a month in total, according to Second Dinner, to get enough tokens for a Series 5 card. But if you look at just Galactus, you need more stuff too. You need things like Null, and you need to have a lot of cards that are locked behind Series 3, like Electro and Wave, and your ways to ramp into Galactus, and then still have your payoffs. Doc Ock is integral to the deck. Spider-Man is integral to the deck depending on the build you have. There are problems represented to the way that you acquire cards, and just because you get enough tokens to get the big bad Galactus, you still might be behind in just normal collection level in general. So until Second Dinner changes their card acquisition philosophy, people will complain about any deck, especially cards like Galactus, that require quite a bit of money up front to be able to acquire them in general. Make cards easier to acquire, introduce new modes, both in a casual sense, like limited, things like that. I'd actually even love to see things like unsets from Magic, which are very goofy, off-the-wall types of effects that can't function in the way that Magic is built already. So it makes for very interesting gameplay that's just very goofy. Marvel Snap could definitely do that. By giving players the option to play competitively with, say, a best-of-3 mode, that gives them the tools to actually combat these types of, in their mind, oppressive decks. Whether or not that's true is, up to Second Dinner to decide. It allows them to have the tools to actually feel like they can beat a Galactus player, where now it's very much look at the draw. Did you get your bomb? Did I get my counter? You got it? Yeah, I didn't? Well, that sucks. I got to retreat. You give them a little bit more of a chance to actually make their plays. And then, when they don't want to play against Galactus, you know what they can do? They can turn to the casual modes. They can go play Draft, go play Limited Sealed, Cube, or some type of off-the-wall, unset type of idea that could be just goofy and fun. This would be amazing for the game, and I guarantee you complaints would go down significantly. But let me know what you guys think. Do you think the card acquisition needs to be changed? Do you think Galactus as a problem needs to be changed? Or do you think it's just a fact of people missing out on the card or not enough tools to be able to combat the card in general thanks to the best of one format? But until then, I'll see you next time.